Have you ever wondered if a simple work of art can hide a secret capable of changing destinies? Well, today I'm going to tell you a story that many would call crazy, but few would dare ignore. Before we dive into this enigma, I want to ask you a quick question. Are you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, subscribe now, like and comment below, because it really helps spread the word about investigations like this and motivates me to bring you even more surprising revelations. The curious thing is that everyone sees art as something beautiful and harmless. But what if I told you that some paintings hide dark secrets, capable of guiding even a murderer in the present? It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Beauty serving as a mask for death. Well, that's exactly what I found. An old painting that stopped being just art and became a dangerous manual. And the most impressive thing is that we're not talking about coincidences or mere forced interpretations. We're dealing with codes, symbols, carefully hidden clues that have spanned centuries and still influence lives and deaths to this day. This is the kind of revelation that challenges everything you believed about history, logic, and even the human mind. So if you dare to follow me to the end, get ready. This investigation will prove that nothing is as it seems. Because when a painting begins to speak, it doesn't just reveal colors, it reveals secrets capable of haunting generations. I remember the first time I saw that painting. It wasn't just an old painting, it was as if its colors carried the weight of centuries of secrets. The canvas seemed to watch me back, as if each brushstroke concealed intentions that went beyond art. I always say that in investigation, nothing is by chance. Even a poorly placed shadow can reveal more than 1,000 words. And there, before that work, I sensed I was looking at something greater than I could ever imagine. Historical records spoke of an eccentric painter, a man obsessed with symbols and codes, who mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Many considered him merely a misunderstood genius, but I learned early on that the lines between genius and madness can be tenuous. Interestingly, as I studied his life, I realized that each painting he produced seemed to carry a hidden pattern, something that had never been explained by art critics. And this detail gave me chills. When I followed the first clues, I realized that the work was shrouded in controversy. Historians debated its authenticity, while collectors fought over its possession as if it were a war trophy. For me, however, its material value mattered little. What truly caught my attention were the nearly invisible symbols, minute lines that seemed to scream for someone brave enough to decipher them. And it was at that moment that I decided to fully delve into this investigation. It's funny how certain objects have the ability to choose us, as if carrying a kind of secret magnetism. This painting, in particular, seemed to call my name. And with each closer look, I had the distinct feeling that the painter had left a purposeful message for someone in the future. The question is, why me? And most importantly, what was this silent code trying to tell me? I didn't yet have the answer, but I knew the next step would lead me to even more disturbing discoveries. The painting came to life again when it reappeared at a contemporary art auction. The room was filled with elegant people, champagne glasses clinking, and discreet whispers circulating. But beneath all that sophistication, I sensed a tense atmosphere, as if everyone there knew the work concealed something beyond its mere artistic value. It was as if each bid were a step toward uncovering a dangerous secret, and few were aware of it. I was infiltrated among the guests, observing every detail. The collector who ended up winning the piece didn't seem simply interested in owning a rare work. There was an almost obsessive glint in his eyes. I've seen this many times in people who allow themselves to be consumed by the power an object can bring. And in investigations, this kind of behavior is often a warning. When ambition mixes with mystery, tragedies soon follow. The auction ended in a euphoric atmosphere, with cameras flashing and headlines ready to run in the next day's newspapers. But for me, that wasn't the end. It was simply the opening of a larger stage. The new owner, unbeknownst to me, had purchased much more than a painting. He had acquired a direct invitation to a subtle trap carefully laid by someone who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. And of course, I was determined to follow every move. Interestingly, that same night I heard a rumor among the auction staff. They said the painting had arrived anonymously, with no reliable record of its provenance. This set off alarm bells for me, because in my experience, nothing that appears out of nowhere is truly innocent. And it was at that point that I realized the investigation I was dealing with wasn't just about a missing painter, but about much more recent forces willing to play a deadly game. A few days after the auction, The painting was taken for restoration to a discreet studio in the city center. I closely followed the process, knowing that this was where the first truths would begin to emerge. The restorer, an experienced and meticulous man, worked calmly, as if playing a delicate instrument. But it was in the silence of that room that the unexpected emerged. Beneath the layers of paint, symbols were hidden that should never have been there. These signs weren't mere artistic touches. They had proportion, logic, and intention. To the naked eye, they might have been scribbles, but to me, they were unmistakable marks of a code. I remembered other cases where criminals had left hidden messages in unlikely places, as if to challenge anyone who dared investigate them. And the feeling I had was exactly that. Someone at some point wanted to be discovered by someone capable of understanding. The restorer was impressed, but tried to downplay the discovery. To him, perhaps it was simply a curiosity about the painter's technique. However, when working with mysteries, the detail is the thread that pulls the whole thing together. I knew I couldn't ignore those marks, so I photographed each symbol, recorded each line, like a detective jotting down clues in a puzzle that still has no definite shape. It was just the beginning, but already I could feel the weight of the crossroads. The most disturbing thing was noticing that the symbols had a repeating pattern, as if following a kind of mathematical rhythm. I didn't yet know what it meant, but I learned that logic, even when it seems chaotic, always leaves traces. And in that moment, something inside me clicked. We weren't just talking about an eccentric work. We were faced with a purposeful enigma, an invitation to decipher a secret that somehow remained alive. As I analyzed the symbols, I began to trace their origins. I discovered that many of them appeared in ancient documents from secret societies that flourished in Europe between the late 18th and early 19th centuries. This was no coincidence. These groups used complex codes to communicate, blending art, religion, and politics into a nearly untraceable web. And, curiously, some of these symbols were right there on the board before me. The connection to secret societies was nothing new in my career, but the detail intrigued me. How could a painting considered merely an art object bear the imprint of messages that spanned centuries? It was as if the painter had access to something few knew, as if he were initiated into a restricted circle of people who manipulated information in the shadows. This alone was enough to raise suspicions about his true role in the story. Searching through forgotten archives, I found accounts of clandestine meetings where paintings were used as means of communication. A detail in a frame, an excess of color, a symbol hidden between brushstrokes. Everything served as a disguise for instructions and secrets. I imagined the scene. Nobles and intellectuals debating by candlelight, deciphering works of art as if they were maps to decisions that would change destinies. The painting I was investigating seemed to be yet another such vehicle for messages. The deeper I delved, the more I sensed an invisible bridge between past and present. The work wasn't just a historical legacy, but a thread connecting something that remained active, like an underground current that never stopped flowing. And this discovery raised an inevitable question. If the painter used the painting to encode secrets of his time, who would be benefiting from that same language today? By cross-referencing the restorer's notes with my own observations, I realized they weren't just scattered symbols. There was a logical sequence. The marks formed a cryptographic enigma, something akin to the codes used by spies in the 19th century. Anyone who has dealt with encrypted messages knows that their beauty lies precisely in how they seem like a jumble of scribbles to some, but a map to others. And at that moment, I was standing before a map that still had no legend. I spent entire nights deciphering patterns, aligning lines and comparing them with historical ciphers I knew from previous cases. Gradually, I realized there was a repeating structure, a mathematical cadence reminiscent of substitution ciphers, those in which letters are replaced by symbols. The irony is that the deeper I delved into this puzzle, the more I felt challenged, as if the author knew that one day someone like me would try to decipher it. The most intriguing detail was that each set of symbols seemed to point to something specific, as if they were coordinates. I remembered a case where a coded letter led police to find a safe buried in the backyard of an abandoned mansion. This parallel made me wonder, what if the painting wasn't just a historical code, but a warning, a script for events still unfolding? The idea gave me chills. When I finally managed to draft a partial translation, the message seemed incomplete, as if part of the code had been intentionally scrambled. This wasn't a glitch, it was strategy. Codes like this never give away everything at once. They require you to play the game to commit to the end, and I knew that by accepting this challenge I would be opening the door to a mystery far darker than any I'd ever investigated. It was as I delved deeper into the translation of the symbols that the investigation took an unexpected turn. Each deciphered fragment seemed to point to a specific location in the city. At first I thought it was just coincidence or the artist's mind game, but when I cross-referenced these points with recent police records, the shock was inevitable. They all coincided with scenes of still unsolved crimes. The painting wasn't just speaking of the past, it was shouting about the present. This revelation weighed heavily on my shoulders. I'd seen many riddles, but never one that connected so directly to current deaths. It was as if the killer was using the canvas as a manual, following every detail to choose his victims. And most disturbingly, there seemed to be a progression, almost an invisible narrative guiding the sequence of crimes. The painting wasn't static art, it was a script in progress. When I presented this hypothesis to some colleagues, their reaction was skeptical. They believed it was impossible for an ancient work to be connected to modern crimes. But the logic was there, clear to anyone brave enough to see it. It's like that in any investigation. The world prefers to ignore uncomfortable connections, while the truth hides precisely in the detail no one wants to admit. And I've learned that when logic and facts meet, there's no room for coincidence. Each crime seemed to macabrely mimic elements of the painting. The position of the bodies, objects left at the scenes, even discreetly engraved symbols. It was as if the killer were dialoguing with the painting, bringing its shadows to life. And if I was right, then there was no doubt. The work not only concealed a code, but also served as a bridge between a painter who had disappeared for centuries and a killer who walked freely through the city streets. As I began comparing the details of the crimes, I realized nothing was random. There was a cadence, almost like a macabre melody, guiding each murder. The dates followed a specific interval. The locations formed geometric shapes on the city map, and the objects found at the scenes functioned as pieces of a larger puzzle. In investigations, when repetition appears, coincidence ceases to exist. And here the repetition was glaring. The logic became more evident with each case studied. One victim was found near a church, another in a library, another in an abandoned theater. All these places, curiously, appeared in the background of the painting, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. It was as if the killer were replicating every detail of the painting, transforming art into a crime script. The work had ceased to be an object of contemplation and had become an unfolding prophecy. The pattern also manifested itself in the victims themselves. They weren't chosen at random. There was a connection between them. Each had ties to the art world, whether as a critic, restorer, collector, or even a descendant of ancient artists. This selective selection indicated not only coldness, but also a calculated purpose. The killer wasn't looking for numbers, he was looking for meaning, and that kind of mind is always the most difficult adversary to face. The more I mapped these patterns, the clearer the feeling became that the next crime was already written, hidden in some detail of the painting I hadn't yet deciphered. The investigation stopped being just about finding the culprit and became a race against time. Because once you understand the pattern, the inevitable question arises: if I don't figure out the next step quickly, how many more lives will this work claim? It was during a quiet early morning that I noticed something curious. Part of the code didn't seem to fit any known logic. I reviewed my notes repeatedly, until a detail caught my attention. The symbols seemed to be backwards, as if someone had intentionally scrambled the clues. And it was at that moment that I came up with the idea of using old mirrors, the ones with irregular surfaces, to test the reflection. The result left me shivering. When I placed the painting in front of the mirror, the sequence of symbols rearranged itself, revealing new messages that had previously been hidden. It was as if the painter himself had foreseen that only someone with a different perspective would be able to see beyond the surface. This moment brought to mind a principle I carry with me in all my research. Sometimes the truth lies not in what we look at directly, but in the distorted reflection of what we avoid seeing. Of course, this discovery didn't come without risks. Tampering with a work of that magnitude, searching for hidden clues, could easily be interpreted as vandalism or even fraud. Many experts would have criticized me for daring to do so, but in investigations you don't find anything extraordinary by playing it safe. It's like in life. If we keep looking at things the same way, we're unlikely to see anything new. It was precisely by breaking this routine that the revelation emerged. The most striking thing was realizing that the reflection pointed not only to new symbols, but also to concrete directions. Like disguised arrows, they indicated specific locations, reinforcing the idea that the painting functioned as a map. And at that moment, I understood this was just the first obstacle in a series of even more complex challenges to come. After all, if the painter had hidden messages in the reflection, who can guarantee that there weren't even deeper layers waiting to be discovered? When I shared my initial findings with some art historians, the reaction was immediate. Controversy. Some said I was delusional, seeing patterns where none existed, like a man seeing faces in clouds. Others, more daring, admitted that the symbols and reflections were too consistent to be mere coincidence. This division didn't surprise me. The academic world often prefers the comfort of theory to the discomfort of truth. Newspapers soon caught wind of the discussions and turned the investigation into a spectacle. Headlines spoke of a detective obsessed with ghosts from the past, while more sensationalist columnists described the scene as the curse on canvas. I was already accustomed to being called crazy. After all, enigmas aren't usually well received until they're solved. The problem is that amid all this controversy, the real crimes continued to occur. Some university professors even wrote articles refuting my analysis, claiming that secret symbols and paintings were merely cultural fads of the time. I confess that for a moment I even considered going too far. But one look at the crime map and the reflection on the canvas to realize there was something bigger at play. My experience has taught me that truth doesn't need applause to exist. It simply requires courage to follow. In the end, the controversy served as fuel. While the experts fought among themselves, I forged ahead, free to connect dots they refused to see. And the deeper I delved, the clearer it became that the investigation wasn't just about art or history. It was about a criminal mind using this academic veil as a shield. And if I was right, that mind had already anticipated the next move. A few days after the auction, I received news that confirmed my worst premonitions. The painting's new owner had disappeared. He was a collector known for his eccentricity, but also for his almost obsessive punctuality in appointments. The disappearance wasn't just strange, it was glaring. The painting had passed through dangerous hands in the past, but this time it seemed the work had chosen another victim, and I knew the clock was ticking. Initial investigations into the collector's mansion were revealing. The space was intact, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. Only the painting, hanging on the main wall, looked different. The frame bore recent marks, as if someone had handled the canvas in a hurry. In my experience, the absence of clutter never means the absence of crime. On the contrary, it's an indication that someone extremely calculating was there. When they finally found the body, the scene was disturbing. The collector was positioned identically to a figure depicted in the painting. It was as if he had been copied and placed on stage to complete the work. I've seen killers imitate films, books, even plays, but never a painting from centuries ago. The coldness of the act made it clear. Whoever was behind this didn't just want to kill, they wanted to send a message, and it was addressed to me. This discovery heightened the tension even further. This wasn't just an investigation into a mysterious painter, nor into secret societies of the past. Now it was a direct race against a killer who used the work as inspiration, perhaps even as a god. And the question that echoed in my mind was inevitable. If the collector was just another piece on the board, who would be the next target chosen by the invisible hand that moved this game? It was during a deeper analysis that we discovered something surprising. Using ultraviolet light, I realized that beneath the layers of paint lay a hidden line, almost invisible to the naked eye. Gradually, lines and shapes emerged, until they transformed into a detailed map of the city. This painting was not just a work of art, it was a true cartographic artifact, concealing secrets that spanned centuries and still have an impact on the present. The map indicated specific points, and not just any points. Each marked location corresponded to previously investigated crime scenes, or historic buildings with dark histories. It was as if the painter had anticipated events or perhaps recorded something he knew was about to happen. This made me uneasy. Was I facing a macabre prophecy or a carefully crafted script passed down through generations, passing from hand to hand until it reached the current killer? The most fascinating thing was that some of the map's markings didn't yet correspond to known crimes. They were like empty spaces on a chessboard, waiting to be filled. This revelation brought a distressing feeling. It meant new crimes were about to occur, following the screen's hidden path precisely. And with each new point, more lives were at risk. The map showed not only what had already occurred, but also what was yet to come. As I gazed at the illuminated painting, I felt as if the original painter were guiding me, as if he had left intentional clues for someone in the future to decipher. This connection spanning centuries made me realize that the painting was more than an object. It was a living narrative. And if I wanted to avoid the next tragedy, I needed to race against time to interpret what those hidden lines were still trying to reveal to me. It was at this stage of the investigation that a new character entered the scene. A man who presented himself as a direct descendant of the original painter. He appeared almost pre-rehearsed, offering himself as an expert to help decipher the work's mysteries. At first glance, he seemed genuinely interested, but my instincts immediately warned me. Years of dealing with manipulative minds have taught me that when someone appears at the right time, it's rarely by chance. The alleged heir spoke with impressive conviction about the painter's life and techniques. He knew details not found in any ancient records, such as personal habits and even phrases supposedly spoken by the artist. This raised two possibilities. Either he had access to secret documents no one else knew about, or there was a much darker connection between him and the current crimes. In both scenarios, something didn't add up. With each meeting, I noticed he would dodge certain questions and exaggerate other answers. This behavior is typical of someone with something to hide. They give just enough information to seem helpful, but never reveal the essence. Curiously, he seemed fascinated by the map revealed on the screen, almost as if he'd been waiting years for this discovery. The gleam in his eye wasn't curiosity. It was someone finally seeing his game take shape. The presence of this character added a new layer to the investigation. If he were truly a descendant of the painter, he could carry in his veins not only his talent but also the dangerous obsession that spanned generations. If, on the other hand, he was merely an imposter, then his entry meant someone was willing to manipulate history to lead the investigation to a specific destination. In both cases, it became clear to me the true antagonist was not only in the past, but walking alongside me in the present. It was amidst dusty documents that I found a crucial clue, a letter hidden among the painter's old family records. The paper was yellowed with age, but still preserved words that carried immense weight. The message spoke of a blood pact never broken, suggesting that the work and its symbols were not just artistic whims, but part of a secret oath. And suddenly everything seemed to take on a new dimension. The letter revealed evidence of clandestine meetings where influential men exchanged information encoded in works of art. The painter, it seemed, was not just an artist, but also an active participant in something much larger. This missing link between his work and secret societies explained why so many details have escaped historians. What to the public was merely aesthetic, to the initiated was a contract, a promise etched in paint and canvas. Even more disturbing was the fact that the letter mentioned descendants, as if the pact were to be carried forward for generations. It was as if the painting were just the beginning of a dark inheritance, passed down from father to son. This connection would explain not only the painting's reappearance, but also the involvement of the supposed heir I'd met a few days earlier. The question was no longer just deciphering a riddle, but understanding how far this pact had withstood the test of time. Each word in the letter felt like a whisper from the past, reminding me that I wasn't just dealing with isolated crimes. The painting was part of a chain, a link between distinct eras, as if it were the guardian of a secret that should never come to light. And it was at that moment that I understood. If I truly wanted to solve the case, I needed to uncover not only what was painted on the canvas, but also what was sworn in the shadows of history. That's when I realized the killer wasn't just committing crimes. He was playing a game with me. Messages began to appear discreetly at the scenes, as if they were direct responses to my discoveries. Short phrases, almost riddles within a riddle, left on paper or scratched on surfaces near the bodies. Understand the work completely. One of them read, "It wasn't just a challenge, it was a personal provocation." This psychological manipulation is something I've faced before, but never with such intensity. The perpetrator didn't just want to carry out his actions. He wanted to shape my perception, drag me into his narrative. It's like a chess player who isn't content with winning. He also needs to humiliate his opponent. Each message left was an attempt to push me to the limit, to force me to make mistakes he could use to his advantage. At the same time, I began to notice signs of surveillance. Unknown people appeared in places I investigated. Shadows moved around corners as I passed. This feeling of being watched brought to mind other cases in which criminals turned to hunt into a spectacle, as if enjoying watching the investigator writhe in search of the truth. The difference was that this time, the spectacle seemed to have a limited audience, just him and me. The most disturbing thing is that little by little I began to perceive the work differently. It was as if the killer had managed to plant his vision in my mind, blurring the line between investigation and obsession. The painting was no longer just an object to be deciphered. It was becoming a mental trap, a mirror of my own doubts. And deep down, I knew that if I didn't maintain my sanity, I would end up just another pawn in his game. Just when I thought I'd deciphered the essence, I discovered it was only just scratching the surface. Among the hidden symbols was a sequence that didn't fit any known pattern. It was a set of numbers and seemingly random marks, as if they were the painter's mistakes. But nothing in this entire work seemed accidental to me. I decided to analyze the sequence more carefully. And that's when I realized it was a date. The shock was immediate. The message indicated a future day, as if the painter or whoever had manipulated the painting later were announcing something yet to come. This detail completely changed the course of the investigation. It was no longer just about understanding past or present crimes. It was about anticipating the next. The painting didn't just narrate a cycle, it also wrote the future in a cold, calculated way. This kind of revelation is frightening because it creates a sense of helplessness. If the date were just a bluff, the risk of ignoring it would be enormous. If it were real, it meant lives were counting down. I remembered an old case in which a killer left broken clocks at the scenes, all marking the exact time the next victim would fall. That memory reinforced my certainty. Time was now my greatest enemy. As I gazed at the painting in the early morning light, I couldn't shake the feeling that every detail had been orchestrated to put me in this position. The painter, the supposed heir, the actual killer, they all seemed intertwined in a game that defied logic. And if this date truly represented the next move, then I needed to act fast. Because one way or another, this enigma within the enigma was about to reveal itself in blood. While reviewing forgotten records in a European archive, I found documents that completely changed the course of the investigation. The painter, until then treated as nothing more than an eccentric artist, had been formally accused of a series of murders in his time. The crimes were never proven, and the lack of concrete evidence allowed him to escape conviction. However, what was most disturbing was the striking similarity between the methods described in these accounts and the murders we were investigating today. This discovery made me see the work differently. Perhaps we weren't looking at a simple coded painting, but a confession camouflaged in paint and brushstrokes. It was as if the painter had left in the form of art, a record of his own actions, creating a hidden gallery of crimes that time has tried to erase. I've seen criminals leave diaries, recordings, even sculptures, but transforming confessions into paintings was something that surpassed all common logic. The historical controversy intensified. Some historians argued that the accounts were fabrications created by the painter's rivals, intent on destroying his reputation. Others believed the documents revealed the true face of a man who knew how to disguise his cruelty under the veil of artistic genius. For me, the similarity between past and present was too clear to ignore. The past, somehow, was repeating itself before my eyes. This twist raised a disturbing question. What if the current killer wasn't just a copycat, but someone carrying on a legacy? If the work was indeed a disguised confession, then every detail carried not only clues but also the signature of a sick mind that spanned generations. And faced with this possibility, I understood that the next step wouldn't be simply to follow clues in the present, but to directly confront the dark legacy the painter had left behind. It was at this point that the investigation stopped being merely rational and began to hit me personally. To crack the next part of the code, I would have to publicly disclose some clues. The problem was, I knew this could give ammunition to the killer, who seemed thirsty for attention. With each word revealed, I risked turning the investigation into a spectacle, and perhaps even provoking the next crime. The question was, how far is it worth exposing the truth? This dilemma reminded me of other cases I've investigated, involving criminals obsessed with notoriety. The more they were mentioned, the bolder they became. But on the other hand, withholding information meant delaying the resolution and putting more lives at risk. It was a cruel crossroads: protect society from panic, or risk revealing details that could save lives or cost even more. Logic mixed with ethics, and neither seemed sufficient. I spent nights pondering the consequences. If I shared everything, perhaps public opinion would help crack the code faster, but it would also create a platform for the killer to shine. If I kept it a secret, the investigation would remain in my hands. But time was against me, and every minute could mean another body. It's in these moments that I realized the true weight of being an investigator. There are not just puzzles to solve, but decisions that shape destinies. In the end, I made a risky decision. I would reveal only parts of the puzzle, enough to create a sense of forewarning, but without giving away the whole game. It would be like showing the killer I was on the board, but without letting him predict my moves. Deep down, I knew he would use this as a provocation, but I was also convinced it was the only way to buy time. And little did I know this choice would lead me straight to the next confrontation. The moment arrived when all the clues converged on a single name: the scholar who presented himself as a descendant of the painter. For weeks, he presented himself as an ally, but his contradictions were so numerous that it became impossible to ignore him. When I finally gathered enough evidence, I realized I wasn't dealing with a mere curiosity seeker. He was the killer, driven by an obsession with bringing the work to life and transforming it into a bloody spectacle. The confrontation took place in an old warehouse, one of the locations marked on the painting's map. Upon entering, I noticed that he had recreated entire scenes from the painting with real objects, as if he were setting up a morbid exhibition. In the center, he stood, awaiting my arrival as if everything were part of his performance. His eyes shone not with fear, but with pride. For him, there was no difference between being a murderer or an artist. Both were creators. The words we exchanged at that moment weren't just accusations. He seemed to want to convince me that he'd been chosen to continue the work, that the crimes were the natural evolution of painting. I confess that, for a moment, I could almost see through the twisted logic that underpinned his delirium. But I soon returned to reality. No code, no matter how fascinating, could justify lives being taken in the name of an obsession. The truth needed to be imposed, not negotiated. The capture wasn't easy. Between the prepared traps and the psychological tension, every step seemed calculated to test me. But in the end, I managed to disarm him and put an end to that macabre cycle. Still, the feeling wasn't one of complete victory, because, as I faced that man, I realized something disturbing. He hadn't created the game. He'd merely continued it. And that meant the painter's legacy might still be far from over. After the confrontation, I gathered all the records, notes, and fragments I had collected throughout the investigation. I spent entire days reviewing every detail, as if I were assembling a puzzle that kept leaving a missing piece, until finally the picture revealed itself completely. The symbols, when aligned in the correct order and reflected in the ancient mirrors, formed a single phrase, engraved in an almost prophetic way: "Art imitates death." This revelation was as shocking as it was disturbing. I realized that the entire work was not just a code or a map, but a philosophical statement, perhaps even a confession. The original painter, in creating that phrase, seemed to want to immortalize his worldview. That art not only reflects life, but also the darkest instincts that humanity tries to hide. It wasn't just painting, it was a dark manifesto framed in color and shadow. As I stared at this final message, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I thought of how many people had gazed at the painting over the centuries without ever noticing the hidden message. It was as if everyone had experienced a riddle laid bare before their eyes, yet invisible due to their lack of attention. This taught me a stark lesson. Often, the answers we seek are right in front of us, but it takes courage to see beyond the surface. Still, a lingering unease remained. If the current killer interpreted this phrase as a call to action, who's to say others wouldn't do the same in the future? The code was cracked, but its essence remained alive, pulsing on the canvas like a flame that refused to die. And I knew that as long as the painting existed, there would always be the risk that someone would turn this dark philosophy into reality again. After all this, the question that haunted me was simple yet disturbing. How many other paintings could hide similar secrets? If a single work was capable of spanning centuries, leaving traces that culminated in modern-day deaths, what about other paintings forgotten in museums or private collections? This idea transformed the investigation into something much greater than a solved case. It became a reflection on the power that art can carry. The impact was also felt throughout society. For some, the work came to be seen as cursed, an object that should be destroyed or locked forever in some inaccessible vault. For others, it gained the status of a relic, as if it were a reminder of how capable humans are of transforming beauty into tragedy. Between fear and fascination, the painting ceased to be just paint on canvas and became a disturbing mirror of our own condition. Personally, the investigation left a deep mark on me. I've solved many cases, but few have shaken my perception of logic, faith, and purpose as much as this one. The feeling of having faced not only a killer, but also a legacy that spanned generations, made me rethink my role as an investigator. It wasn't just about capturing the guilty, but about deciphering stories that time tries to erase, and that, if left unrevealed, continue to echo in silence. In the end, I understood that the true impact wasn't just the revelation of the code or the arrest of the killer. It was the warning it left for all of us. What we choose not to see may be precisely what most shapes our reality. And as long as there are enigmas hidden in works or people, there will always be a need for someone willing to face them. Because deep down, every mystery is an invitation. And I, Jonh Spencer, never refuse such invitation. After all you've heard, the question remains, how many secrets could be hidden right before your eyes, but you've never bothered to decipher them? The investigation into this painting wasn't just about a murderer or a mysterious painter. It was about the hidden logic that guides our choices, and how ignoring signs can cost us dearly. And here's the challenge for you. In what areas of your life have you been avoiding facing the hidden codes? Sometimes the answer to your biggest personal enigmas lies in the seemingly insignificant details. Are you willing to look deeper, or will you continue to accept the surface as truth? I don't bring these stories just to entertain, but to provoke. Because if even a painting was capable of hiding a death manual, imagine what might be hidden in your habits, your decisions, or the stories you repeat every day. What do you need to decipher now to change the course of your own life? And before I wrap up, I want to reiterate, if this investigation has made you think differently, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your comment below. I want to know what detail of this story resonated with you the most. Share it with me. After all, every great mystery only makes sense when it's discussed.